Welcome in. Belly up, have a seat, and grab a drink as we talk some Wingman Fantasy Football. Welcome into another edition of Wingman Fantasy Football, the League Podcast. I am your host, Michael Furley, and as always, I'd like to thank all of you, or any of you who may be watching or listening to today's show. This is episode 74, a Week 13 preview. And before we get any further along, let's make sure that everybody is in the room.
Wingmen assemble!
All right, I want to start off by wishing you a wonderful Sunday morning. It is game day, people, and the playoff push is real. All right, this week we have a jammed-packed episode for you guys as we will set the slate for this weekend's primetime games. We will check in on the player news and practice reports, go over this week's matchups, check in on the activity of our waiver wire, see who is on top of the newest power rankings. We're going to dive into the mailbag, take a look at our playoff scenarios.
Playoffs? Don't talk about playoffs.
And I'm also going to mention a late season tip and trick for you guys. But before we do any of that, I would like to apologize for the erratic schedule this past week. As many of you may know, my real job is that of a UPS driver, and the hours, workload, and energy required with the time needed for my body to recover has gone way up during this time of year, and unfortunately, I did not have it in me to get an episode done for you guys on Friday morning. I sincerely apologize for that, and I thank you for your understanding. My goal is to keep up with our normal schedule, getting them out on Wednesday morning and Friday morning, but please understand that I cannot guarantee that at this time of year, so I appreciate your patience and understanding. All right, guys. Also, this episode is going to take the place of the Week 13 ins and outs, as we have as much news as we're going to get going into the inactives. You can always check out our website at wingmanentertainment.net/game day to get all the latest news, including our inactive lists and stuff like that, and news and player notes. So keep that in mind if you need any updated standings that weren't done, as I'm recording this at about 2 in the morning. So most of the stuff's been already reported except for last minute changes. Okay. With that being said, let's see. All right, let's get into the news and notes heading into Week 13 here. All right, we have 6 teams on bye this week, and this is truly a bye-nado, as we have the Ravens, the Bills, the Bears, the Raiders, the Vikings, and the Giants are all off this week due to their bye weeks, which means many of our managers will be without some big-named players. There's not going to be any Lamar Jackson or Gus Edwards for the Ravens, no Josh Allen or Stephon Diggs for the Bills, no Justin Fields or DJ Moore for the Bears, no Josh Jacobs or Devontae Adams for the Raiders. TJ Hawkinson is not going to be available for the Vikings, and Saquon Barkley and the Penguin Tommy DeVito are also not going to be able to play this week due to the Giants' bye. As for this week is a true bye-nado, and it seems to be hitting Cubert's rage the hardest, as he has 5 players out on bye this week. All right, let's check in on the schedule for our weekend's prime time games. On Monday night this week, we have the Cincinnati Bengals heading down to Duval to take on the Jacksonville Jaguars at 8:15 p.m. On Sunday night, we have the Kansas City Chiefs heading up to Lambeau to take on the Packers at 8:20 p.m. And on this past Thursday night, we had a shootout in the Lone Star State, as the Seahawks traveled to Dallas to take on the Cowboys, and there were some monster performances on Thursday night. And I can only assume that there were some great regret for some of our managers on their lineup decisions. All right, we had 6 players in our managers' lineups on Thursday night, starting with Red Sox Nation, who had his special teamers going with Brandon Aubrey, the Dallas kicker, and the Dallas defense. Mac Daddy 2s had Geno Smith and CeeDee Lamb playing, and that was a delicious tandem. And we also had Waddle away with Tony Pollard playing on Thursday night, and Tampa Brady's kicker, Jason Myers, played on Thursday night. As for some other news and practice reports, Zach Ertz of the Arizona Cardinals and the Arizona Cardinals have agreed to part ways, leaving the tight end room alone for Trey Bride to excel like he's been doing for the last few weeks. He will have no competition going forward other than his health. Also, we have Cleveland quarterback Dorian Thompson-Robinson has been ruled out as he is still in the concussion protocol, and this means that Joe Flacco is going to start for the Cleveland Browns this Sunday. I don't know if that's good or bad, just something very interesting. We also have the Green Bay running back Aaron Jones is going to miss another week as he has already been ruled out for Sunday night's game. This means that A.J. Dillon will get the lion's share of the carries for the second straight week. Also, Minnesota wide receiver Justin Jefferson has been activated from the IR, and he's going to return after the Week 13 bye. Arizona wide receiver Michael Wilson has also been ruled out for the Sunday's matchup against the Steelers. Seattle running back Zach Charbonnet left Thursday's game early, but his knee injury is not serious as it has been deemed a bone bruise. So hopefully he won't miss any time, and they have 10 days before their next game. So he should be okay, but definitely check on that later in the following week. We have Jacksonville running back Travis Etienne was limited all week, but is expected to play on Monday night against the Bengals. And in that same game, Cincinnati wide receiver T. Higgins is going to play. He is going to play this Monday night against the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Welcome back.
Also, New York Jets quarterback Aaron Rodgers has had his 21-day practice window open for a potential return from the IR. However, he has already been ruled out for this week. Also, Philadelphia tight end Dallas Goedert did return to practice this week with his fractured arm, but he is likely to miss one more week as he has been deemed doubtful for this Sunday. Miami running back Devon the Man Achane has been removed from all injury reports, and he is set to make his return to the lineup. Arizona wide receiver Marquise Brown has missed practice all week, but he is trending towards playing. New Orleans wide receiver Chris Olave is still technically in the concussion protocol, but he did get in a full practice on Friday, and that means that he has a very good chance to play on Sunday. LA Chargers wide receiver Keenan Allen is dealing with a thigh bruise, but he is going to play, and he says he is good to go. Wide receiver for the Philadelphia Eagles, Devontae Smith, is off of the injury report, and he is also good to go. While rookie wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers, Jaden Reed, did return to practice on Friday, and he was listed questionable all week, and he is likely to be a game-time decision for the Sunday night game. So I think right now Lionize has him on his bench, but if he's considering playing him, definitely check the news throughout the day on Sunday to make your best lineup decision. And Raheem Mostert and Tyreek Hill are both off of the injury list, and they have a great matchup this week against the Commanders. And all of the New York Jets running backs are listed as questionable heading into Week 13, but Breece Hall did get some practice time in on Friday, and he is looking like the most likely to play. Pittsburgh wide receiver Deontay Johnson did miss practice on Thursday with an illness, but did return on Friday, and he is now off of the injury list. Tampa Bay wide receiver Chris Godwin was added to the injury report during the week with a neck injury, and he will now be a game-time decision for Sunday's matchup. Philadelphia star wide receiver A.J. Brown has been dealing with a thigh injury, but he is no longer on the injury list, and he is good to go for the Sunday game against the 49ers. Cleveland wide receiver Amari Cooper is not listed on the final injury report, but he is dealing with a rib injury, probably going to be wearing some sort of extra padding or flak jacket, so just be aware of that as he heads into the Week 13 game. And despite limping through last week's game, LA Rams wide receiver Cooper Kupp has practiced all weekend full and has no injury designation heading into this Sunday's game. Now, Houston wide receiver Frank the Tank Dell.
Once it hits your lips, it's so good. You know it.
He has logged in limited practice sessions this week with a calf injury, but Coach DeMeco Ryans indicated that he will be available and should be good to go against the Broncos. Indianapolis Colts running back Jonathan Taylor has been ruled out for this Sunday's game with his surgically repaired thumb, and at this point he has not been placed on IR. I am praying that he does not, so he can return for the playoffs, fantasy football playoffs, that is. So we will see how his status progresses in the next week or two. Houston wide receiver Noah Brown, who is listed as questionable, is now expected to play. And the Kansas City running back Jerick McKinnon has been ruled out for the second straight week. All right, guys, let's see who's playing who in this week's matchups.
I want you!
matchup.
All right. We're going to add a little context to these games this week as we have in our first matchup a huge game as our number 1 and number 2 seed are playing each other, and the winner of this game will control his destiny for the top seed. As we have 8-4, Amazing Spidey is playing against 8-4, Paul's Cubert Rage. And this is the context we are going to add. I'm going to give you some notes on both these teams in regards to their best and worst matchups for their fantasy players. So for Amazing Spidey, Derrick Henry has the best matchup in his lineup this week as Henry's playing against the Indianapolis Colts, and that is the 7th easiest defense against running backs. As for his worst matchup this week, his number 1 player, Christian McCaffrey, is up against the Philadelphia Eagles, and they are the toughest run defense against all fantasy running backs. As for Cubert's Rage matchups, Rashad White has the best matchup for his team this week as they're going against the Carolina Panthers, and they are the 3rd best matchup for running backs. And his worst matchup in that same game is Mike Evans against Carolina Panthers, and they are the 5th most difficult matchup for wide receivers. On to our next game, 7-5, Jimerson's Red Sox Nation up against Reggie's Lions at 6-6. And Red Sox Nation's best matchup this week is Tyreek Hill up against the Commanders, and that is the 2nd easiest opponent for all wide receivers. While his worst matchup is Breece Hall up against the Atlanta Falcons, and that is the 2nd toughest matchup for running backs in terms of fantasy. As for Reggie's Lions, he has Brandon Ayuk playing against the Philadelphia Eagles, and that is the best matchup for receivers. So these two teams have the 1st and 2nd best matchups with their receivers in their lineups. As for Lions' worst matchup this week, arguably his best player, Amon-Ra St. Brown, is playing against the New Orleans Saints, and they are the 6th most difficult matchup for wide receivers. On to our next game, we have 6-6 Alex's They Took Our Jobs up against 2-10 Bernie's Team B.
I'm Cuban B.
Yes, Cuban B.
Before I get into the strength of their matchups here, I believe I said in last episode that Bernie's Team B has lost 7 games in a row, and I'm pretty sure it is actually up to 8 games in a row. I just want to make that correction so we're as accurate as possible on this show. All right, as for some strong or weak matchups for Alex's They Took Our Jobs, his best matchup this week is Bijan Robinson up against the New York Jets, who are the 5th easiest matchup for running backs, while his worst matchup is Alvin Kamara up against the Detroit Lions, and that is the 3rd most difficult matchup for running backs. All right, now checking in on Bernie's Team B. His best matchup is Jalen Waddle up against the Washington Commanders, and like I said for Tyreek Hill, that is the 2nd easiest matchup for wide receivers. And his worst matchup is Baker Mayfield for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers up against the Carolina Panthers, and that is the 3rd most difficult matchup for quarterbacks. On to our next game here. We have Katie's King George at 7-5 up against Corey's Mac Daddy 2s at 5-7. And Katie's King George's best matchup is probably her worst player as Adam Thielen is playing against Tampa Bay, and that's the 4th easiest matchup for wide receivers, while her worst matchup is Garrett Wilson up against the Atlanta Falcons, and that is the 10th toughest matchup for wide receivers. As for Corey's Mac Daddy 2s, he has Deebo Samuel.
Who? Debo.
Is playing against the Philadelphia Eagles, and that is the best matchup for our wide receivers. Also, his worst matchup this week in that same game is DeAndre Swift up against the San Francisco 49ers, and that is the 4th most difficult matchup for running backs. On to our last game of this week's slate, we have at 6-6, Nick's Waddle Away up against Ken's Tampa Brady at 5-7. And his best matchup this week for Nick's Waddle Away is Tua up against the Commanders, and that is the best matchup for quarterbacks. So he sat Dak Prescott for Tua because of this matchup, and let's hope that Tua comes through because Dak Prescott had an amazing game on Thursday night. This will be one of those I knew I did it right, or man, did I make a mistake picks. His worst matchup this week is one of his worst players, so kind of a good guy to have a bad matchup. Kareem Hunt is playing the Rams, and they are the 6th most difficult matchup for running backs. As for Tampa Brady here, his best matchup is Najee Harris playing against the Arizona Cardinals, and that is the 2nd best matchup for fantasy running backs. And his worst matchup is kicker Jason Myers, who played on Thursday night against Dallas, and that was the 2nd most difficult matchup for kickers. Myers had 5 points on Thursday night, so that's about what you would expect for that kind of tough matchup. All right, guys, let's check in on our waiver wire. In this week's waiver wire, we had 3 waiver claims this week with 0 NFL players receiving multiple bids. Our waiver wire has been getting very quiet over the last 2 to 3 weeks. And I don't know if people are just losing interest as the season gets further along, although all but one of our managers are still alive for the playoffs, or if it's just that there's really no good players out there. I haven't made a waiver claim myself the last 2 weeks. One, because I didn't like any of the players better than the ones I've had. And also, I've had questionable tagged players in my IR spot, meaning I couldn't make any moves. So this week, our waiver claims were Joshua Palmer went to Red Sox Nation for $8, and that was the only bid on Joshua Palmer. The Indianapolis defense went to Lions for $2, and that was also the only bid on the Colts defense. And Sam Laporta went to Team B for $0, and no one else made a bid on Sam Laporta. All right, guys, let's check in on our power rankings.
I have the power!
By the power of Grayskull.
I'm living in it, no one man should have all that power.
Wingman Power Rankings.
All right, guys, let's see the power rankings here. And we have no change from last week, as Amazing Spidey is still on top. They took our jobs in second. King George is the 3rd most powerful team, according to Yahoo, while Mac Daddy 2s is 4th. Lion Eyes is still holding steady at 5th, while Cubert's Rage is at 6th. Tampa Brady is at 7th. Team B is up to 8th. Red Sox Nation is still at 9th, and Waddle Away is at the bottom. Keep in mind, Red Sox Nation was at 9 last week, and he came up with the highest score of anyone last week. So you can take these with a grain of salt, but according to Yahoo, these teams had the highest projected score going forward. All right, guys, let's get into our mailbag this week.
You've got mail.
You've got mail. Wingman Fantasy Football.
Mailbag! All right, this question comes in from Ken, and the question says this: Hey, Mike, what platform do you prefer the listeners to use to take in Wingman Fantasy Football content? That's a very good question. So as you guys may know who have been following this for a little while here, you can get our audio feeds on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and TuneIn Radio. You can also get our video feeds on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@wingmanfantasyfootball, or you can check out wingmanentertainment.net/podcast to get both our audio and video feeds if you wanted to check out our website for that. So the question is, what platform do I prefer our listeners to use? Overall, I don't have a true preference. This is a hobby for me, right? So I'm just trying to figure out how to do these things. I created my own RSS feeds, and I upload them to these servers or upload these to these sites on myself. I'm serving these things. So I'm just trying to see how to do it. And so far they're working pretty good. YouTube, YouTube's been good because now I watch the videos on YouTube now instead of Wingman Entertainment. I generally listen to the audio feed on TuneIn Radio and or Spotify. So that's what I use. I guess if I truly had a preference, I would say YouTube because I understand their analytics a little better. It shows me the views and the comments. It's just a little easier to understand from that end. But really, I'm just putting it out there for you guys and and trying to find where you're at. So if you have if you're a Spotify user, I try to get it there for you guys. I know some of our listeners are on Apple a lot or have Apple phones and stuff, and they use Apple Podcasts. So I want to put it where you are. So whatever you use is what I prefer. I use TuneIn Radio and YouTube for audio and video. And I guess for video, I prefer YouTube just because I like the analytics. But other than that, I don't really care. So thanks for the question, Ken. That's a very good question. Maybe I had to think about it a little bit. But again, I just want to get this out to you in the easiest place that you will be able to find it and enjoy our content. And I appreciate you guys who do watch and or listen. All right, now it is time to check in on some of our playoff scenarios here.
Playoffs? Don't talk about it. Playoffs?
All right, let's start in with the top of the leaderboard here. So Mike's Amazing Spidey is currently the division leader of the even division and the number 1 seed at the moment. His best case scenario is to hold on to that number 1 seed, and the way he can do it, there are 2 ways he can do it. If he wins out, he's the number 1 seed. Or if he wins one, he will need Paul to lose one and then not have Paul outscore him by nearly 40 points. Because right now, Amazing Spidey has the point tiebreaker, but 40 points with 2 weeks to go is nothing. So he wins out, he's number 1 seed, or he needs Paul to lose at least one and not be outscored by 40 points, give or take. Amazing Spidey can also get the number 2 seed simply by winning one or Reggie losing one. So his magic number to take the number 2 seed is 1 game between him and Reggie. To get the number 3 seed and still hold on to a round 1 bye, but of course not win the division, would be if he loses both, he would need both Katie and Jimerson's Red Sox Nation to lose at least 1 game, and he can hold on to a first round bye. Now, his worst case scenario, he is not technically, Amazing Spidey that is, clinched a playoff berth, but due to the points that he has so far had in, he actually has unofficially clinched a playoff berth. The worst he can do is tie, say, for 4th or 5th place, but those teams are down by 250 points or so. It would be nearly impossible for him to get knocked out of the playoffs. So he is unofficially clinched a playoff spot going into week 13. On to our next manager. This is Paul's Cubit Rage, who is currently the number 2 seed. He's the division leader of the odd division. He is tied with Amazing Spidey in record, and he has his to win the number 1 seed overall. All he has to do is win out, as he is playing Amazing Spidey this week. So if he wins out, if he wins this week, he controls his own destiny. If Amazing Spidey wins this week, he controls his own destiny. So for the number 1 seed, Paul's Cubit Rage just has to win out, and he's the number 1 seed. Or if he wins only one, Mike would need to lose one, and then he would have to outscore Mike's Amazing Spidey by 39.65 points or more. Now, to get the number 2 seed for Paul, he has clinched the tiebreaker in his division, as he is already done with his division games, and he is 3-1. So the only way he could lose the division is if he gets passed by in record. So for him to win the number 2 seed and win the odd division, all he has to do is win one more game. Or if he does lose both of his last 2 games, he would need both Jimerson's Red Sox Nation and Katie's King George to lose at least 1 game. So he's got a lot of ways to get the 2 seed. He's got a couple ways to get the 1 seed. Now, for him to get the 3rd seed, he can get there and have a first round bye, even if he loses both of his last 2 games, but he would need Jimerson or Katie's King George to lose both their games. In his worst case scenario, the same as Amazing Spidey. He has not technically clinched a playoff spot, but due to his points and his tiebreakers, he has unofficially clinched a playoff spot. Congratulations to you too, Paul's Cubit Rage. Well done, sir. All right, on to our next manager. We have Jimerson's Red Sox Nation. His current position in the standings is 3rd. His best case scenario is to get the number 2 seed and win the payout for winning the odd division. He only has one way for that to occur. He would need to win his last 2 games, and Cubit Rage would have to lose his last 2 games, as there are no he cannot get it by tiebreaker. He has to pass him, and he's down by a game with 2 to go. As for winning a first round bye and securing the 3rd seed, Jimerson's Red Sox Nation can do this by winning one of his last 2 games, or having 2 of these 3 things occur: Alex, Nick, or Reggie losing one, while both Corey and Ken losing one, and then not being outscored by the points needed for them to pass him in tiebreakers. Now, Jimerson is not clinched a playoff spot. He can be eliminated from the playoffs. He will be eliminated if he loses his last 2 games. It's going to take a few things to happen altogether. If he loses his last 2 games, and Alex and Reggie wins their last 2 games, and Nick or Katie wins this week, because Nick and Katie play in the final week, so one of them is going to get that win in week 14. So if Alex wins both games, Reggie wins both games, and Nick or Katie win this week, while Red Sox Nation loses both games, he will be out of the playoffs. On to our next team, Katie's King George. She is currently in 4th, tied with the Red Sox Nation, way down in points, and she can get up to the 2nd seed still. She would need a lot of help, though. She would have to win her last 2 games. She would need Paul to lose his last 2 games, and she would need Jimerson's Red Sox Nation to lose at least one of his last 2 games. She can also still earn a first round bye and get that 3 seed. Just a reminder here that only the top 5 seeds make the playoffs. I don't know if I mentioned that this time around, just to keep that in mind. So right now, Katie can get up to the 3rd seed still and get a first round bye. And for that to happen, she would have to win her last 2 games, while Red Sox Nation loses one of his last 2 games. or she can win one more game than Red Sox Nation going forward while having Alex and Nick and Reggie all lose at least one game. All right. As for to just clinch a playoff berth, not worrying about buys, she would have to win one more game at least while having two of Alex, Nick, and Reggie lose at least one game. So if she wins just one game, she still will need help. She will need two of those players tied for the last spot to lose one game. Now, she too can also be eliminated. She has not clinched a playoff spot. She will be out of the playoffs if she loses her last two games and two of the following occur. If Alex wins one, Nick wins one, Reggie wins one, Corey wins two, and Ken wins two. If two of those five things happen and she loses both her games, she will be out. Now, the good thing is she can take one of those off the list as Corey and Ken play each other in week 14. So both of them can't win two, but one of them can. So let's just take one of those off. So she will be out if she loses twice and she has two of these four things happen. Alex wins one, Nick wins one, Reggie wins one, or Corey wins two. All right. Also, now for Alex's team, who's currently in fifth place, but he is tied with three other teams for that fifth spot and final playoff spot. He can get as high as the third seed and get a playoff round bye. By doing that, he would need to win his last two games. He's going to need a lot of things to happen at the same time. He needs to win his last two. He needs Jimerson's Red Sox Nation to lose his last two. He's going to need Katie to lose at least one, and Nick to lose at least one, and Reggie lose at least one, and not be outscored by Katie by 43.49 points. Now, in order for him to clinch a playoff berth, there's too many scenarios to get into here, and I'm going to explain a little bit here, as he can still make the playoffs even if he loses his last two games, and he can also be eliminated from the playoffs even if he wins his last two games. So there are too many scenarios to kind of play with there, but what I will do is that I will tell you how he can be eliminated. Alex, as they took our jobs, can be eliminated if he loses one of his last two games and either Nick or Reggie wins out. So if he loses one and Nick or Reggie wins out, he will be eliminated. He will also be eliminated if he loses out and Nick or Reggie wins one game, or Corey wins two, or Ken wins two. Right. So if he loses both of his games, all it would take would be Nick or Reggie to win one, or Corey or Ken to win two. So he's in decent shape if he wins one game because he'll need any one of two players to win both their games. If he loses both his games, he's going to need be a lot of any one of these teams to do the right amount of winning. So he's not secured a playoff spot, not at all, not yet. On to Nick, who is tied for fifth place, but he is currently in sixth due to tiebreakers. He can get up to the third seed and still earn a first round bye by winning his last two games while having Red Sox Nation lose his last two, and Katie losing one of two, and Alex losing one of two, and Reggie losing one of two, and he would still have to outscore Alex by 7.87 points and not be outscored by Reggie and Katie. That's for Nick there. So he needs a lot to go on, and he would need tiebreakers. As for Nick, the same as with Alex, he has too many scenarios to clinch a playoff spot here, as he can still make it at 6-8 and can still miss out at 8-6. So we're going to find out how he'll be eliminated. That's a little easier way to do it. And it's the same exact as it was for Alex. If he loses one game and Alex or Reggie wins out, he is done. So he is rooting against Alex and Reggie to win he wants them to win as few games as possible to have a chance here. He's also out if he loses both his games and either Alex wins one, Reggie wins one, or Corey wins two, or Ken wins two. On to Reggie. He's also tied for that fifth spot, but he is in seventh due to point tiebreaker, and he is very similar to the previous two managers, except that he can still win a division. He can get the even division, or the even division, and he can get the number 2 seed and get a payout for a division winner. The way for this to happen for Lion Eyes is if he wins out and Amazing Spidey loses out, he is the number 2 seed. So he can go as high as number 2, or he can also be out of the playoffs. He will have the division tiebreaker against Mike's Amazing Spidey if that occurs, the 2 wins versus 2 losses. As in that case, he would beat Amazing Spidey, and Reggie would be 4-0, while Amazing Spidey would be 2-2 as for division record. Reggie can also still get the number 3 seed to earn a first round bye. It would take a lot of things to happen at the same time. He would need to win out. He would need the Red Sox Nation to lose out. Plus, he would also need Katie to lose at least one, Alex to lose at least one, and Nick to lose at least one. And then he would have to outscore Alex and Nick by the appropriate scores and not be outscored by Katie. As for playoff berths, his are similar to Nick and Nick and Alex. As there's too many scenarios, as he can make it at 6 and 8 and be eliminated at 8 and 6. But we'll show the easy ways for him to be eliminated. If he loses one of his last 2 games and either Alex or Nick wins out, he is done. If he loses his last 2 games and if Alex or Nick wins 1 or Corey or Ken wins 2, he is also done. On to our next group of players. We have Corey, who's at 8th place at 5 and 7. He is not eliminated yet. He's not eliminated. I don't want to say yet. As he can get a playoff berth, he can't get to the 3rd seed. But to get in the playoffs, he has to win out to even have a chance. So if he wins his last 2 games, and he needs a lot of things to happen at the same time. So if he wins his last 2 games, and Alex and Nick and Reggie would all have to lose their last 2 games. Or if he wins his last 2 games, he can still get in if Alex, Nick, or Reggie wins no more than 1 more game, but he would have to hold on by tiebreaker, as he does have more points than all 3 of those guys. So it starts with him winning both, and then he's just watching the scoreboard to see if he can avoid any of those guys winning twice or any of those guys outscoring him by 58 points or more. A little note here, we have Ken playing Corey in week 14. So one of those guys is going to guarantee themselves at least a win, and one's going to guarantee themselves at least 1 more loss. All right, this is the easiest way to know that Corey's going to be eliminated. If he loses 1 more game, he is done. That is it, regardless of anyone else. If he loses, he is out. He is also out, regardless of what he does, if Alex, Nick, or Reggie wins their last 2 games. All right, on to Ken, who's in 9th place out of 10, but he is also still alive. He can get a playoff berth, very similar to Corey's. He's going to need a lot of things to happen at the same time. He'll have to win out. He will need Alex, Nick, and Reggie to lose out. He can also do it by winning out and having those guys win no more than 1 game and holding on to the tiebreakers. And once again, Ken is ahead of all of our 6 and 6 teams in points by a minimum of 45 points. So he's got a little cushion there. So he's got a chance, but he's got to take care of business here. Again, same for him and Corey. If he loses 1 game, he is done. He's also done if either Alex, Nick, or Reggie wins out, or if he gets passed by points if Alex, Nick, or Reggie wins 1 game. All right, so there is that. As we get to the end of this episode, I want to give you one more late season tip and trick. Tips and tricks.
Or quirks for jerks.
All right, we mentioned this a little bit before. This is how to take advantage of our IR rules. As like I said, if you use the IR, you open up a unicorn bench spot. And here's the way you can actually get the most out of it. As we are now towards the end of the year, and there's only 2 teams left on bye after this week, and that's Arizona and Washington. So here's the tip. I don't know if I'm going to do it, because I like my kickers and defense. But if you know you're locked in, for example, with 1 defense and 1 kicker that you're going to ride out the rest of the season with, what I would do or consider doing is picking up a kicker who is on IR, putting him in your IR, and now you can get an extra running back, wide receiver, or quarterback to play through the playoffs or even the last game or 2 of the regular season. So if you know that if you have a garbage defense or a garbage kicker that you're really never going to play or unlikely to play, go ahead and drop it and pick up a kicker who is either has an NA next to their name or on the IR. You can find them. I haven't looked personally this time, but I've done that before in the past. You can find them and put them on your IR spot and open up that unicorn bench spot for extra hoarding, extra insurance, all that good stuff. It's playoff time. You got to find the best ways to manage your roster for maximum flexibility and or blocking of your opponents. So that is a big time tip or trick that I'm giving you that I could have kept for myself. All right, guys, I want to thank you all so very much for watching and or listening to this episode. Happy Sunday morning to you once again. Good luck to you guys, as these games are super important for seeding and or playoff berths. Don't forget, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn Radio, and Google Podcasts for our audio feeds. And of course, you can get our video feeds at our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@wingmanfantasyfootball. Also at wingmanentertainment.net/podcasts. Don't forget that this is the episode for this Sunday, so I'm not going to be doing it ins and outs. If you want to get the last minute inactive reports and or news from prominent reporters, go to wingmanentertainment.net/game day, and you can get your verification on your inactive list, guys. All right. So good luck to you all. Happy playoff push time. And with that being said, guys, may your glass be full, your mug stay frosty, and we will see you next time.